You are about to hear, all of you on the call are about to hear from Ann Neuberger, the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Tech. In short, she's the White House advisor, or the White House official responsible for cybersecurity in the United States. And I've known all her predecessors except one in that US cyber White House role since '94. I know them all because whenever they hit really hard problems, they call and say, who's the expert on this? So in this area, it was always Mike Asante, and now it's the two of you. Anne is different from all of those others because of her way of solving problems. And it just works better. She brings a rare combination to national leadership that allows her to build trust among the people who need to come together to make a problem or to solve the problems. And those are people who don't normally work together well. They don't play well with other children. And she can make that happen. And I believe the reason she can do it is that she has a really rare combination of ways of dealing with the world. First of all, she has honor and strength, as all of her predecessors had to some degree, but in her, they are front and center, and she's tough. But she adds to that two other characteristics that are less common in her predecessors. One is when she speaks, wisdom comes out. She's just good at this kind of thing. But I don't think those are the three that make her uniquely capable of causing positive change in very hard situations. I think what she brings is a fourth characteristic. And it's really the greatest strength she has in causing people to come together. And it's that when she speaks, kindness is always on her tongue. And that's just all too rare in Washington today, and in our field. So with the strength and the honor and the wisdom and the kindness, I bring you Ann Neuberger, a national treasure. Ann, it's over to you.
Hi, Alan. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's a very kind introduction, speaking of kindness. I've had the opportunity to know Alan for many years, and indeed to call him on any number of hard problems. And to Alan's point, some of them were hard technical problems in our field, in all of us communally. There are many hard technical problems, but many of them were the interrelationship between culture and thinking and technical problems. And how do we all rise to the occasion when we have a challenge and do what's needed to be done to make a difference, and leave the networks we manage, the responsibilities we have, better for our successors. So Alan's been an advisor and an insightful source of wisdom throughout the 20 years I've been working these issues. I feel so grateful for that. So thank you so much for the kind intro, Alan. And a second thing Alan has always emphasized is how much, yeah, we've got technical challenges in cyber, but people are the key. And if we can recruit and attract enough great people from diverse backgrounds, their personal backgrounds, their professional backgrounds, there's nothing too hard for us to overcome together. And that's an important lesson. And I thank you so much for that. And I thank you for today's opportunity. And then to Rob and Tim, it is inspiring to hear the way you all are a resource for so many facing hard challenges. I know you've both been a resource for us, as I'll talk a bit about as we think through the administration's approach to OT security and how we can hope to improve OT security in partnership with the community here. So I thank you both for the work you've already done in just the first 6 weeks of this administration to help us and all of you here. So thank you so much for the invitation to address the ICS Security Summit. It is so great to be here virtually, and it was so great to hear Rob's promise that next year it'll be in person. So all the personal relationships that are a big part of getting work done hopefully can turn on again. And I hope everybody I'm talking to is well and your families are well. These have certainly been a difficult time for all of us as people, as professionals, as families, as a country, as a global community. So it's so great to be here with a community that has such awesome responsibilities to secure the systems touching millions of Americans' lives, and to do so at a challenging time. I'll talk about these challenges for a moment and how we're thinking about approaching them with you as a new administration, as part of the global community who works on OCS systems. So OT security, cybersecurity is a necessity. I don't have to say that here. You all see and know control systems touch every aspect of our lives, as well as our national security. Many of those systems weren't built for the connectedness we have today, that growing connectedness, and many of those systems weren't built for the threats they face today. As we know, both public and private sector entities are increasingly under constant, sophisticated, and malicious attack from adversaries, foreign and domestic, criminal and countries alike. Because of the difference in mission, impact, risks, threats, and culture, a deliberate and specific OT cybersecurity approach is required to secure our industrial infrastructure. We don't have the option of not doing so. As a first principle of cybersecurity, whether OT or IT, it's both. If you can't see a network, you can't defend a network. And if you can't see a network quickly, you certainly don't have a prayer of defending a network. And that applies, as we said, to both IT and OT networks. So the administration recognizes that as a community, we have to be able to see and block malicious activity in critical industrial control system networks across energy, gas, electricity, pipelines, water, and chemical critical infrastructure sectors. There's growing vulnerability in these systems, there's growing connectedness to IT systems, and we certainly see criminals and countries having intent to compromise those systems. We're working on a plan of high impact activities that are executable quickly, focused on the ICS and related operational technology that touch the largest numbers of Americans' lives first as a first phase, or impact national defense across gas, electricity, pipeline, water, and chemical. So those are the two attributes we're using to scope and get started. There's yet one more lesson in this space about how we address integrity of systems as we're learning from the SolarWinds supply chain compromise, where numerous sites across the industrial community, including power, water, and manufacturing, were compromised at the ICS OT network layer, where there was limited, if any, visibility of the problem. And as we know, right, many legacy ICS networks are not structured to maintain detailed logs of network activities. That was one of the things that was eye-opening for us as we started combing through the lessons from SolarWinds and seeing how much logging has to become routine practice and where it's easy to do, where it's possible to do, and how we ensure we do that. Because the absence of such logs both impedes efforts to determine where ICS networks have been compromised by malicious cyber operations, and it also mitigates our ability to actually address the malware that could create system failures. So more to follow on the details of the plan we're putting together. We've recruited somebody from the sector to join our team at the National Security Council at the White House, because we wanted to ensure we had practical OT experience directly involved as we built our plan. When the US government moves without that practical experience or without that industry involvement, we're not as effective as we need to be. So we want to ensure our work is fully informed by the work you all do and the realities you all see, the actual operations and experience you all have. So I'm excited about the details of that plan and the timeline. We're looking to actually work with you to build out some outcomes. So let's take a step back for a moment and talk about what's at stake. You know, the recent Florida water incident was a great example. In February, as this group knows, a hacker remotely breached a Florida city, Tampa's water treatment system and increased the sodium hydroxide to potentially deadly levels. Fortunately, the breach was quickly detected and employees adjusted the controls to safe levels before any contaminated water reached the community. As you all know far better, the detection of the malicious activity was not by means of cybersecurity, but rather serendipity and a really good person doing their job really well. That plant operations employee happened to see the computer mouse pointer moving on the screen and acted quickly. But the breach and the way it was done highlights the critical need to address the convergence between operational technology and information technology, and to also address the need for rapid visibility, technology that can see and block. So that's the technology. And then there's us. We have to fundamentally shift our mindset from incident response to prevention and invest our time and our resources accordingly. Today, the cost of insecure technology is born at the end, when we have incidents and we need to do cleanup, or when things occur. I truly believe it'll cost us less if we build it right at the outset. And that's something we're thinking about, particularly as we look deeply at the lessons of SolarWinds. And we'll have an upcoming executive order that will focus on building in standards for software, particularly software that's used in critical areas. The level of trust we have in our systems has to be directly proportional to the visibility we have. And the level of visibility has to match the consequences of the failure of those systems. I'll say it again, because I think it really needs to be a goal we have together. The level of trust we have in our systems has to be directly proportional to the visibility we have. And the level of visibility we need has to match the consequences of a system failure. And we all know that trust today is often built on instant or deep experience, not the practical visibility of sensors of a network that keeps us updated. And the level of visibility doesn't always match the consequences if that system fails. You know, I often think of an example. I'm a New Yorker, and a number of years ago, when the mayor of New York wanted to address poor sanitation in New York City restaurants, the Department of Sanitation had been reporting on it for a while, my understanding, and he was trying to really fix it, address it. And they mandated that a rating of the cleanliness in restaurants, ABCD, something similar, had to be posted in the front window of every restaurant. So if Alan and I were going for coffee, and there was, you know, a cafe, Bob's Cafe had an A in the front window, and Jane's Cafe had a D in the front window, you know where Alan and I would go for coffee. And it immediately put money on the problem, right? When restaurant owners started to see that they were losing sales based on the cleanliness of their restaurant, that visibility fundamentally illuminated the problem. And that's where I'd love to get to in cybersecurity. Today, as a network owner, if we're trying to buy a technology, network management software, we have no way to know the cybersecurity practices that were used in building that network management software, or the level of risk we're introducing to our networks by buying a particular software versus a competitor one. That's what we need to change. Because if we have that visibility, whether it's software bill of materials, a shout out and a thank you to Alan Friedman at NTIA's work in that, or other areas, then we can make decisions that put money on cybersecurity and say, we value it because we value it based on the risk or lack thereof or less thereof it is introducing to our network. And I think fundamentally that transparency, that visibility will help drive improvements in the risk we all see and reduce this continued scale of compromises we see. Just this morning, right? We're all focused on the Microsoft Exchange, back to an IT issue, vulnerability, and how to address it quickly, whether for those who are already compromised or those who are quickly patching to address that as well. This issue of understanding what's in our systems is at the root of some of the executive orders which were issued recently. For example, the Commerce Department issued an interim final rule to implement Executive Order 13873 that was designed to address foreign adversaries exploiting vulnerabilities in the ICT and the comms and telecom supply chain, and to protect the vast amount of sensitive information that's stored in and communicated through comms and technology products and services. And indeed, it was to define 6 categories of products, including critical infrastructure and comm software. So with that, this, as I know virtually, this community is a global community, public, private, US, allies and partners, countries around the world. And it takes a global community to protect community infrastructure. So from an administration perspective, we're continuously focused and committed to improving our coordination and collaboration with the private sector and our international partners to develop, promote, and protect critical technologies that touch our critical infrastructure and those around the world, and also to counter those adversaries that seek to use those technologies to undermine our economic prosperity and our national security. So in closing, there's much to be done. It can only be done together. We look forward to coming back in the near term with a very focused near-term plan to partner to improve visibility and security of OT networks. Thank you for what each of you do each day to deliver the amazing power, clean water, and other just profound aspects of our lives each day in an environment where many of those systems weren't necessarily built to make your jobs easy. Thank you. Looking forward to working with you. And I think I'll sit down with Rob for some discussions. And it's always more interesting when we get to hear from Rob. So Rob, over to you.
Not at all, but I think you still have a couple moments for those questions. And so if you have to jump for anything, of course, feel free. But I've got a couple of questions that came up during your talk. First and foremost, just in a sort of a fawning way, I'll say thank you again so much for being here. It is unreal to me, and Tim and I were sort of messaging each other back and forth, to have somebody at your level in the White House advising and have the technical aptitude that you do, the insights in OT security. I know you probably don't want a lot of compliments, but this is the type of stuff that allows us to get people motivated about this field. And so I'm just really excited that the administration appointed you to that position. I'm really excited that you answered the call. For anybody that doesn't know Anne's background, I encourage you to go read her background, every single point in her career, answering the call to go do something bigger and better. And I would describe you as a true patriot in kind of the best sense of that word for our country. So
that means a lot to me, Rob. Thank you.
And thank you. So my first question, just to get us started here, is literacy for cybersecurity in this administration seems unusually high. Like, it is really amazing when I get to interact with the Hill or any aspect of the administration, that we've even got the National Security Advisor and the press secretary tweeting out about patching vulnerabilities in Windows. Like, that's
first time ever.
It's not normal. You know, you just kind of want to shake the community and say, this is abnormal. So, you know, and you're talking about OT logging and visibility and OT security being a necessity with technical expertise. It's not normal. Do you, kind of a softball question to start with, do you feel the administration gets that? Like, as you talk to your peers, the National Security Council and everyone else, do you get the sense that they understand that this is an abnormal situation with the amount of expertise around the room?
First, thank you, Rob, for saying as a softball question to start. So you're making clear that I should prepare for what comes next. Thank you. I think absolutely, right? The president demonstrated that he cared, right when he came in, he said SolarWinds is going to be a priority. And because of what it represents, right? The scale of vulnerability it represents, frankly, the relative ease with which, could be compromised because of insecure software practices and the risk it brings. And that's IT, let alone taking that to OT. So I certainly see the creation of the first ever, a Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber represented his sense that he wanted somebody focused really full-time on cyber and tech issues. And I've seen in just the first 6 weeks I've been here, the number of senior level meetings, the intelligence briefings on this topic, the care and focus put on this topic. So it's certainly an administration priority and the president's priority.
That's fantastic. And yeah, everyone should know that I didn't send you questions ahead of time, so that they're going to get more difficult. So here we go, Anne. In the aftermath of Oldsmar, as you're looking at the broader OT community, I would be so bold as to say there are certain industries where it's easier, given the infrastructure that's already built around sharing and insights and community and electric sector coordinated council and electric as an example. When you look at the scale and scope of the water utility industry as an example, and you look at like 55,000 municipal systems, how do you even wrap your mind around what the US government's role might be, knowing that there's a lot of requirements at the state and local and entity level? How do you think about influencing that community broadly?
It's a really good question. So I think three things, right? One is talks like this one, right? Rob, you've got the whole community rallied here, right? And talks like this one saying OT security, IT security matters. You will face as a community increasing threats. It's not getting better, it's getting worse, right? Because there's more connectedness and there's more entities, whether it's criminals, whether it's folks who just want to have some fun, whether it's nation states who want to message or potentially deter a government from doing certain things because they feel that they can show impact to average Americans' lives, right? So first, above all, talking to that community to say, folks, it's important that you address this. The second aspect is really looking at the community to say, there are larger companies who have more resources, whether that's people or fiscal resources, there are smaller ones. And let's ensure that we talk with the private sector and really understand the uniqueness. To your point, power is different from water, which is different from chemical, and understand the uniqueness of the private sector, the aspects, the public commission aspects of that. We've had some initial discussions with the EPA. Commissioner was fantastic as a discussion to say, how do we build an integrated approach that first talks about partnership with the private sector, but also says, due to the level of risk this brings to a large number of Americans' lives, we need to move forward with speed. Let's find the models that help us move forward with the most speed and that recognize the Public Utility Commission roles, recognize the revenue models in the industry and account for that. And that's what we've been putting a lot of work into, as I noted in this kind of action plan, to ensure that it incorporates that input and reflects the differences in each of those sectors' makeup.
No, fantastic. And you know, kind of building off of that, you know, when you talk about chemical and electric and water, I think it's very fair that there's going to be industries out there that say, what about us? Like, we're extraordinarily important. You know, we even have in the chat, you know, some representatives from like the agriculture industry, like, man, we're dependent on ICS. And kind of easing into this question, I'd note that one of the things I've seen fail before, and hopefully this isn't too coarse, but I've seen previous administrations and policy folks come out and say, we love everyone, we love everything, we're going to do everything, and then they don't do much. And so the boiling the ocean aspect definitely doesn't work. However, it's a difficult needle to thread to say, this is where we're going to focus because of these priorities. And we love you too, and we want to support you too, but we got to place our energy somewhere. How do you think through that challenge of communicating to other industries where you're focusing and why you're focusing there?
So as we all know, in solving a problem, I find the most effective way to approach it is to scope it, get momentum, and do a series of 90-day spins on that, right? So when you're trying to initially get a train moving, you get it moving. You don't put the full number of folks you want on the train, or you don't load it up with all the cargo. You focus it on what is the most significant problem, the one that we really have to address in the near term. And the principle we're using touches the lives of 50,000 or more Americans, kind of as that first threshold we're using. Let's start with that, get the train moving. And once the train has momentum, we then have second phases and third phases and fourth phases. So this is not a black and white plan. It's more a matter of scope and setting multiple steps, learning at each step, right? We learn by doing, and then applying those lessons with each successive step.
Perfect. And yeah, not to give you validation that you don't need, but having seen it, tried a couple different times in our wonderful OT security community, I don't see how it can work otherwise. So the direction that you all are taking, the scoping it down, the health and safety focus, the 50,000 people more, it's the first time I've looked at policy decisions being made for our community and going, holy crap, this might work. Like this is exciting. So,
but we need everybody's partnership. And Rob, your input particularly has been fantastic, right? In that, because as you say, the practical operational experience of trying these things in these complex environments needs to be a part of it.
Absolutely. So, and kind of building off of that a little bit, and then I'll take the questions in a different direction. When with the expertise, with the scoping, with the people you have around the table, it's definitely we have the ball moment, but that also means we've got to run with the ball. And I think you made a comment previously to me, which was, I kind of read these studies that are the same every 5 to 10 years of this is a problem, let's fix it. And I'm just wondering, not speaking to any specific action plan or anything like that, but like when you leave office, what does that success look like to you on this topic, where you sit down and you go, man, I put a dent in this problem?
So I'm curious to hear your answer to that question as well. But here's what I would say. The dream we all have when we come into a job is, I want to leave it better for the person who follows, right? I want to leave the country a little more secure because of the work we've all done. I think for me, what I'd like to see is that we've identified the key sites that we really must understand well, either from a touching Americans' lives or a national security perspective, and that we've, in partnership with the sector, deployed rapid detection and blocking for malicious activity in a way that gives us confidence that we have the visibility to know if something malicious is intended, and can block it in real time before it impacts the way we know control systems can uniquely impact. And the partnership with the sector is going to determine how deeply we can actually get that done across the sector, and really studying and understand the incentives and disincentives, right? Financial incentives, cultural incentives that we need to shape. But that would be my thought. And I'd love to hear yours. Like, how would you frame out what must we get done in the next year?
No, I think what you're approaching is fantastic. And I talk a lot about visibility and the insights, largely because trying to talk about how we should address problems that we don't see is all anecdotal. And I don't think that helps anybody, and it opens up these fights. And without critiquing any agency, you'll see DHS report different numbers to Congress that DOE reports, and so forth and so on. It's like, we're not drinking from the same trough. And so when I look at it, the things that you all are doing that excites me is it's a true, like, let's move the defense needle as well, but it's a, what is the ground truth reality? Let's actually figure this out and know. And I think a lot about SolarWinds with that, where we're still going through hearings on what's the true scope of this, and everyone's focusing on SolarWinds and Microsoft. There's a lot of other players wrapped up in the supply chain discussion, and not one of those congressional hearings talk about OT and the challenges of the fact that we don't even begin to know what all was done in those ICS networks. And so I think your focus on that part of the problem and engaging the community is great. I also, without speaking poorly of any other previous attempts, when they've rolled out without talking to Electric Sector Coordinating Council, without asking the American Water Association, without talking to, that's when we can trip over each other. And I've been excited to hear from CEOs of power and water companies about, hey, this and person, and we were talking, and it's like, holy crap, you're everywhere. So it's been wonderful to see. So an interesting one, a little bit of a turn. I think when we look at ICS security, we want to definitely see more people involved in our community. We want to draw more people, but for anybody looking around the average profile, we would be naive to not notice that it's a bunch of white guys for a lot of industrial. As you think about bringing people into the field and helping with an amplification role, there's a lot of work we got to do, and it's not all the White House has to solve everything. But when you look at the White House's role and kind of bringing in the diversity into cybersecurity in general, making those pathways, obviously just you being in your position is so fantastic. But how do you think through that kind of responsibility in that position to welcome folks in our field and make it feel more inclusive?
I love that question. So 2 thoughts. One is, Alan just actually sent me a note, I think it was last night, sorry, the days sometimes merge together, about the National Cyber Challenge and the work he's done and the diversity of the individuals coming in as part of that challenge, which I think is huge, right? Sometimes there's a mental barrier to cyber, or folks are like, oh, it's a lot of math, or et cetera. And it's kind of like, no, it's really cool problem solving. So if you can get over that barrier, folks get a chance to engage with it and see it and find the fun in it, I think that's huge. So I want to give a shout out to Alan's work in that way. I think in a related way, one of the things that I find so cool about cyber is that for some folks, the right track is a college degree. For others, there are so many certification and training and other ways that you can acquire and show your skills, including your practical skills, that folks can just jump in, right? So it almost doesn't matter what your formal training and formal education was. And I think for people coming from various backgrounds, for whom college may not be the right path for various reasons, there's a equally great path to really be successful in this field and to get hands-on, whether it's hands-on experience, whether you want to do policy experience, whether you want to, bridge kind of the mechanical and the technical aspect of that. So I think all of us talking about the field in a more approachable way, kind of saying, hey, and in a way, maybe there's a positive aspect of the hacking attack in Tampa, and that we can recruit and say, you know what, there's so many key roles that are needed to prevent this kind of thing. Come on in. And here's the different certifications or the different easy, trainings that you can do to really jump in and get started. So I think I would actually, challenge all of us to look across people we know, and just some people who we know are smart and curious and innovative, and just kind of talk to them about what you do, because what you do is so cool that if you talk about it, I just imagine we could really expand the field in an easy way. And to your point, particularly if we reach out to folks who come from more diverse backgrounds, who may not have had the opportunities we've had, I think we can change it really quickly. I was impressed when Alan sent me that note where he said, Anna, it almost felt easy. We opened the field. We showed folks, what's possible here. And so many came.
Yeah, that's awesome. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to pull a couple of the questions that are coming in. This one's from a journalist, Sean. I see you sneaking into our conference, so that's okay. He's a good one. But they're all good, freedom, free press and all sorts. Anyways, but
Rob just protected himself, guys.
We love you, Sean. Anyways, so he's asking about the executive orders, and I'll put it in some context here. But I think I happily offer it up to you, but I don't think necessarily about speaking about upcoming executive orders. But I think there's his heart of this question is around kind of the goals and what it's aiming to accomplish when you start looking at executive orders in this space, knowing that. In the previous administration, there was a couple executive orders issued that related to things like supply chain. And, I think it's fair to say that the intent was well received of let's look at this problem. I think the rollout of that executive order was problematic at a time that the sector was facing new regulations with NERC. For the electric sector, you had DOE and FERC doing their own thing. You had the administration putting out its own executive order. So not putting anybody down, it felt like it was a little uncoordinated. So how do you think about executive orders as a tool and what you're doing in the future with them?
That's a really good question. So first, to be clear, the executive order I was talking about really reflects some of the lessons we learned from solar wind. So it's not directed at this particular sector. So there's two things I was talking about. Those are more things like addressing the way we do more coordinated incident response, addressing the issues we saw with sometimes public-private information sharing, and frankly, addressing the issue I talked about, which is security standards for critical use software, right? That sense of we don't know, and the visibility into that, right? How do we get some visibility into the software we buy and the risks it's bringing in, particularly those that have admin privileges and are really, foundational to a given network. But back to the point about this sector, I think that's why, as we're building our action plan, focused initially on OT security, we're doing so much of that engagement, right? We've talked with various entities. I'll give a shout out, of course, to Tom Fanning, and he's always a source of tremendous insight. We're talking to several individuals. I won't give others a shout out, more to follow on that because I haven't asked, to get those insights, and the SEC to talk as well before we actually launch that plan, to kind of ensure we're getting that voice and we have common goals and we talk about the most effective ways to execute. Because I think, look, we need urgency to address things that sometimes, I can say this with love as a community, we sometimes kick the can down the road and things don't get better, folks, right? The trend is not getting better. So we know we need to address them with urgency, but we're committed to getting that partnership and pursuing it together with urgency.
And again, just to give validation that's not required, that I think the sectors sometimes, especially in industrial, are almost intimidated to move, knowing that they might make the wrong move and then there'd be regulatory pressure or something that invalidates their efforts. And so for the administration and you to take a leadership role of saying, here's at least an example of what right looks like, and feel comfortable moving in a direction, and we validate this direction. I think that in of itself can be something that restores a lot of confidence in the private-public sector, partnership discussion, and get a lot of that moving. So
I think just on Rob, to that point, right, what you just said, we all have to we recognize, I think, that in the sector, sometimes the disincentives, right, the managing the downside is a tremendous focus, perhaps even more so sometimes than the potential upsides, because of the reality of a regulated sector, right? So I think that's something we certainly have to keep in mind in terms of how to address it.
Absolutely. And this one's, again, kind of building on that, but going towards those that don't have resources. And the question relates to, in the electric industry specifically, there's usually rate recovery methods for, transmission providers and similar. Public energy companies usually have some mechanism, but there's disincentives as well. But when we look at the cooperatives and some of the municipalities and the smaller players, the non-for-profits, how do you think about bolstering their ICS security or creating an ecosystem where we can figure out how to take care of our local towns, electric and water?
It's a really good question, particularly as you noted earlier in water, right? Where there's just the numbers, we're talking thousands of entities. So I think here are our thoughts, and we're going to be doing a lot of engagement on exactly this issue to better understand how to scope. We're starting with the larger utilities, both because of the touching more people's lives, but also because they have more resources and more experience. And then, frankly, there's something to be said about the economies of scale for the industry as well. So if we can build out those economies with those first larger players, and then talk with the public utility commissions and discuss, the initial capital expenditures versus the O&M aspects of that, that's a key part of the plan we're thinking through right now, because to be effective, we eventually want to be able to have that visibility and assurance across the full ecosystem, but it's a really large ecosystem, and understanding who are the core stakeholders, who are the stakeholders we work with from the US government, so that there are voices in the sector who give us the sector's perspective across the spectrum of the players in the sector is equally important. And we're, in some of the utilities, that's easier. In electric utilities, that's certainly easier than in water. And in chemical, we see, for example, that the chemical utilities have their own way of rating criticality. So we want to use that criticality rating in the way we approach it as well.
No, that's fantastic. And I think kind of in the previous topic of like the disincentives, I think there's a growing discussion in Congress on if they're not going to do it, we'll just regulate them. And I don't know that that's always the best answer. And so one of the things I just really like about the White House's approach, your approach, is before we get to that point, let's take a swing at doing this as a community. And I don't think I've ever heard you threaten the sector or similar, but and I'm in my own interpretation here is I get a sense on the Hill of, well, we'll try something, and if it doesn't work, or if the community doesn't adopt it, then we're going to come in swinging. And so I'm very grateful to see you in the way that you're partnering with the sector, because it's a giant olive branch to try to get this done together.
There's certainly a fear, to your point, on the Hill that these issues have to be addressed and have to be addressed with urgency, right? So I think there's certainly a clock for all of us in terms of, how we do so. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. All right. So we'll start winding it down here and just ask probably another question or two. There was one just generally about like security clearances and declassification information, and in your background, your previous position, you live that day in and day out. So as you think about getting actionable insights from the government out to the sector, which is not just the government's role, it's not just y'all's responsibility, but as you think about trying to make sure we communicate broadly to the sector about relevant, actionable intelligence when we have it, how do you think through those challenges? And is that an area you want to focus on at all? And if so, kind of what are you hoping to see?
Such a good question. So we have, so first, yes, that has to be a goal. There are 3 challenges we face in making that goal reality. Item number 1 is we're a country that values both privacy and security. So the intelligence community does not have visibility into US systems largely, right? So in my last role, we do not, where we may see foreign threats, absent a good understanding of what are the technologies that are used across, for example, OT systems or even the IT systems connected there, we may know, for example, that an adversary is going to seek, I'll just use the current example, right? Seeking to exploit Microsoft Exchange. But it's hard for us to know, okay, for the most critical OT systems, how many of those are directly connected to an IT network with a public facing Exchange server, right? Or related to that, right? That was probably too in the weeds. But I guess so I think that's issue number 1. So getting that greater visibility to understand which are our critical sites, getting the visibility on control systems networks so we can start bringing that information together. So we understand where are the key vulnerabilities? Where is the connectedness? What are the second order effects of one system going down and having broader impact? I think will enable the intelligence community to be able to share more useful intelligence. I think then the second thing is there is a trend and a growing trend, which is great to see in the intelligence community of recognizing that we need to share information that's useful, actionable, and timely. Useful, actionable, and timely. If it's not each of those 3, there's a ticking clock on sharing, right? So if it takes too long, or it's not actionable, either because it's shared classified or because it's so high level as to make it hard to figure out what is the threat or what's the vulnerability. And that goes to the usefulness part, right? Where, I had a couple people on my team in my last job who came in from the utility sector, and they were hugely valued and pulled into every discussion because folks kept saying, is this useful? We don't know. Is this useful, right? So I think there's work to be done, and I encourage the participation in forums like ISACs, because the more folks participate, the more you also give the government individuals a sense of what's useful. And frankly, then you can also share information about what you're seeing, which sometimes enables the intelligence community to look as well and get a better sense of what foreign actors or others may be doing.
I love the focus on useful. All the rest of it is important, of course, but I think too many of us have had the experience where, with no offense meant to them at all, but like an FBI agent rolls into a classified briefing, calls in the utilities 3 weeks after the event, 3 weeks after public reporting, and says, it's China. And we're like, we don't care. Like, what's the actual information to help us? And so the focus on usefulness there, I think, is spot on. So when you... again, kind of as we're winding down, last two questions here. This one's probably the hardest. I apologize in advance. When you look at engagement with the different sectors, I think right now, executives at different industrial sectors have experience where multiple government agencies want to help. They're so excited, passionate, wonderful people. But it means, though, that a CEO or the CSO or their staff can be hearing different answers from the local field office to the DHS, the DOE, to EPA, to everybody coming in. How does the administration think through kind of the roles and responsibilities of how we at least centralize the message and make sure we're on the same page of music?
So we've heard that feedback. I've certainly heard it quite a few times. And it's an issue that we know we need to take on here to look at how we ensure that there's an integrated, holistic approach to government engagement with the private sector. So it's certainly something that's on the to-do list, to bring in the various stakeholders, discuss what each brings, because everybody brings something important, and then discuss how we build an integrated approach so that the sector doesn't feel the way many folks are telling us they're currently experiencing it.
Perfect. Well, the fact that there's awareness of it is already exciting.
Step one, right?
My last question for you is a different one altogether. You've had an amazing career across a number of different positions, and I think hopefully people will go research and understand the amazing work you did at the NSA and Cyber Command. But what has been the biggest eye-opening experience for you of the transition from practitioner, NSA, dealing with all this to the White House? I mean, that is a transition in a position most people will never have. And that's such an amazing thing. What was probably the biggest surprise to you or excitement for you getting into that leading government position?
It's so interesting. I was just thinking about this the other night. So I was leaving work and I walked down the steps and I made a right turn, and up ahead of me was the Washington Memorial illuminated. It was dark, it was night. And it was illuminated with the American flag flying. And, for me, my father came as a refugee to America from communist Hungary. My grandparents came as refugees from the evil of the Holocaust. Their parents and their siblings were killed. And, walking out and looking up at the flag and saying, I have an opportunity to repay a small part of that profound family debt. It was just a very profound sense of gratitude to have the chance to work on these kinds of issues, to engage with the folks here in this community who are key partners in working on those kinds of issues, and to ensure, frankly, that the way America's been a beacon of light for families like mine, and there are thousands of families like mine who came for economic opportunity, who came fleeing persecution, who came dreaming of a better life, and to ensure that control systems is a great example, right? That those systems are safe, that we can continue to be that beacon of just hope for folks around the world is, I think, a dream we all have. And in whatever walk of life we're in, we have an opportunity to keep it that way. So that's really what it is.
You're amazing. Tim and I started off the conference telling people that we're hope peddlers. the eternal optimist that we're going to get this done. And I will tell you, I am so thrilled to know you, to have you be a fellow hope peddler. I got to say, I've just never been so optimistic about our community and about what's getting done.
Likewise.
I, on behalf of the community, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all that you're doing. We all wish you well. We'll all be your partners in this journey, and just thank you for taking up the challenges of our community. And yeah, thank you for being here today.
You're most welcome. Thank you all. We're coming. We need your partnership. Thank you, Rob, for all you've already done in that partnership, Tim and Alan, and looking forward to what we can all accomplish together. Be well. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, Ann.